Yeah. So in case this goes public, I just want to set up the scene. So we have 1 hour, and I have amitu with me. So a little bit about myself first. So I have joined. My name is Siddhant, and I have joined FifthTry last year. So I've been working here for about 1.5 years. And FifthTry has existed before, so many people have worked there before, and there has been a lot of stuff that has happened before I joined, and during the time that I've joined, we have done quite a few things. And so last week we have been discussing about our next course of action. How are we thinking about what to do at FifthTry, and not much about what to do, but how we do what we have already decided. So with me, I have Amitu. So let's start with a short intro of.
Uh, yeah, I'm very happy we are starting this exercise. We see, like, we have been doing a lot of coding in silos, and yeah,
Yeah.
we want to talk about what we have been up to, and it's been like 5 years. So, starting about myself, I been a programmer, as you see, since quite some time. Uh, more than 20, see 98 for example, 99 I built my first web app which was used by let's say 500 plus people, and so I've been really kind of into programming since quite some time. And yeah, so this is talking specifically about fastn and FifthTry. Started thinking about it about 2010 when I was doing other company or rather another product which was kind of like a it was like a book authoring tool. So you can author a book online, and the idea was remixing books. So like the idea was that if you look at the current market, book computer, let's say learning programming related books, right?
Mm.
So for those books, if you see, there's a huge amount of beginners books, and there are very few intermediate and advanced books. The problem every team faces is that they are not using a single technology, but maybe five, six, seven technologies. They are using Linux, they are using maybe PostgreSQL, they are
Right.
using Git, they are using JavaScript, Python, Django, and so forth, right? And there's probably a book for each of these topics. And so, for example, if you're a team lead, you have to kind of ask all your employees to kind of, or whatever programmers in your team to read so many books. You obviously don't, you're not going to do that. No one can really have like seven books before they start becoming productive. So the idea was, can we, if the books were done in open source way, the way we don't start write our software from scratch. We just use so many, how do I say, open source libraries and packages, etc. So the idea was that can we all do the same thing for books, and can we, write a book by including stuff from different existing books, and what you include is the real value, right? So because for this team that you are managing, you know exactly which portion of Django, React, whatever you're using.
Mm.
You don't need to know whole of Django. You probably even want to ban, okay, for this particular thing, we are not for authentication, for example, we're not going to do Django auth, and we are going to do something else. For example, we are using some auth related whatever service or whatever. So the idea was that can we build a online tool where people can, team leads can come, or anyone who is teaching can come and create a book by just dragging and dropping table of content, like just creating a table of content, and the content of the book will be specifically like you will select, okay, from Django pick section 3.1, from Python pick section whatever something else, and from PostgreSQL pick some of these chapters, and then you created a very custom book, which is probably very tiny, laser precision book, etc. And the bottom line is key. That was the idea of that. We can go into that. But at that time, I picked LaTeX as the underlying um, like format in
Authoring.
which you're authoring, yeah, authoring content, right? Because at that time, I did consider Markdown. 2010-11 Markdown was not as, how do I say, kind of the standard writing format as it is
Mm.
today, but at least was definitely there. At that time, restructured text was actually more popular because Django or rather Python was kind of like fully on restructured text. I did look at them. I looked at a LaTeX. I looked at a, but from that point of view, I realized ki I'm not happy with any of those stuff. So at a very gross level, I started thinking about what is the authoring language for future, right, for next 100 years, and it felt like Microsoft Word and Google Docs and Markdown and LaTeX are not the answers. So the answer should be faster, right? To me, the idea was that there should be some answer which should be open source, it should be text based so that it can be version controlled and so forth. So yeah, so I've been thinking about that. And 2020 is when I kind of left Acko. I've been in the past involved with uh, Acko, which is an insurance company, one of the
Yeah.
um, most interesting digital insurance company in India. They had the largest seed capital in the seed raise round in probably at some point in the world. Um, till some point, they were the largest seed round in the world. And before that, and they are obviously a billion-dollar company today, and I've kind of helped build the entire. I was a CTO, and I built the entire technology till there were around 100, developers. Before that, I was part of BrowserStack, where again I was the founders of BrowserStack were interns in my first company, which is I was building a phone, a hardware startup I was doing in 2002, 3, 4 period. So founders were electrical engineers, and I was like founders of Tech were electrical engineers, and I was like mechanical engineer. I needed some electrical engineering knowledge, and they were the ones who were helping me in some of those hardware circuit design stuff. So, but yeah, when they started Stack, like I was the third person sitting with them in cafes before they even had a um, yeah. So and obviously I took them till some 70, 80 developers when they reached this, and then they are also kind of like
Mhm.
before that. There was a company called there is a company called SMS Gupshup, which was earlier called Webru. So there also in Webru, I was the first employee, and I helped build the. So what I've done all my life is web products, right? Like web development.
Right.
So not only I am very passionate about the authoring the language, but I'm also very passionate about the framework. Right? So for example, when Django came, I was probably the first team in India using Django in production, right? Before even 0.1 came up, sorry, 1.0 came up. Django 0.95 was used by me in production, and obviously when I spoke to Python, community in India, there was some Python, I don't know, conference. Someone was using it in production, and I'm also in the Django authors list. Like I have some patches contributed in Django. So I've been very passionate about these two topics,
Mhm.
right? So what is the authoring and what the web framework should be? And I have strongly believe that most story of the web frameworks is pretty overly complicated. So Fastn kind of comes as an intersection of an authoring language and a web framework, right? In fact, in Acko, for example, for 4 years, mm, we built a Rust-based web framework which used Elm for front end, and we called it Realm. It's on I think on our GitHub you can find it. I used it for maybe 6 years. It was my primary web framework for me for over 5 to 6 years, and we did a lot of like in Acko we used it extensively. Obviously, Realm was extracted out of Acko code base earlier. It was kind of part of Acko itself, but Acko was a monolith kind of like this thing that we had at least till the time I was heading um, their engineering. So we extracted the Realm as an open source stuff, and then when FifthTry was there, I started building it. I actually added a lot of very interesting feature, but it didn't go anywhere because I was very dissatisfied. Elm was not easy to learn, and 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 again I had some ideas about how to do better, and the only way I could do better was to build the whole web framework, which is what. So that's my
Mhm.
basic journey so far. Yeah.
Right. So you said the idea of fastn existed around 2010, but FifthTry, the company that you have started and I'm employed by it, it started in around 2020, right? Is that correct? And if we go to your YC page, the story there is a little different. So it says that it is some sort of tool that helps you sync your code with your document. So a
Yeah,
software product
right.
and
So,
documentation syncer like tool. So how did that happen? Because to me, you are
mm,
looking like a very passionate guy about authoring tools. So you want to improve latte experience and you have a lot of experience in web development. So how do you go from there to this problem?
right. So another thing I ended up doing, and I have been a very passionate advocate of documentation since forever.
Uh,
So yeah, so obviously, and I feel like in browser stack, for example, I instituted some, but it was not as good. Um, Acko I improved it for 4 years. I created a very, very rigorous documentation process, and we created a unique sort of workflow in Acko for documentation. The problem with documentation is how do we make sure that documentation stays up to date with the code? Because code, especially in a startup, right, in a company, funded company, etc., where the velocity of feature release, etc., is pretty high, right? How do you create documentation, and how do you make sure that it stays up to date? Right? Like in fact, I had a litmus test of you know documentation. If you have a good documentation culture or not in your company, it's very easy to say, oh, we have good documentation, right? Like how do we know as a litmus test you really have it or not? Is this test whether you ask yourself, the CTO or anyone in the company, if your documentation says something, and let's say CTO says something else, who do you trust? Or the CPO, the chief product officer, or chief CFO, or whatever, right? Like there are so many heads of your company,
mm,
CEO, you know, if they are saying X and your operation is saying Y, who do you trust? And if you're confused about this question and the answer of this question is not obviously the documentation, then you do not have a documentation culture because that's the main thing that is required. The reason people hate documentation is because they don't see the value in it. Why? Because if the documentation is slightly out of date, a
right.
slightly out of date documentation to me is equivalent to slightly poisoned food, right? You will die if you eat slightly poisoned food. It's not so a small if you do not know 1% is wrong and but you do not know which 1%, you have to treat the whole as wrong because virtually nothing is reliable. And for everything, you'll have to go and look at the test, or you have to talk to other people, or look at the functionality in production to see whether this one is the 1% that is supposedly wrong. Because no one can tell you what 1% is wrong. Because if you knew, you would have just fixed it. The problem is we all have, oh, we are one of documentation is like 90% correct. Not even 99%. Most of the people will say something much lower than 99. And even if it was 99 or 99.9, it will be pretty not reliable. And that's the problem why people hate documentation because it's so much effort. And how do we create? Like, for example, when I created this process in Acko, I was manually like the Hitler of documentation for about maybe till the documentation. So we had a single Acko PDF, which was till 100 pages or so. I was the Hitler of that. I was forcing everyone, you have to write documentation, you have to write documentation. But something around that point, I realized that people saw the value of the documentation. What they saw was that, and I'm calling it continuous documentation, right? So we created this continuous documentation, which is like continuous integration and continuous
Right.
deployment, right? So if you look at continuous integration, right, like continuous testing or whatever we call it, so you kind of like initially probably resist. And there was this whole period, right, where CI was something to be advocated. There were a lot of CI advocates. There were a lot of bloggers who were like, oh my God, there are conferences where people used to go and give, like this whole CI was a marketing term, right? Continuous integration. There were companies like Travis CI, right? The name CI existed in the company because it was so new at the time, Circle CI and so on. Right? There was a bunch of
Mm,
companies. Oh, we are CI. CI was the buzzword. Why was it a buzzword? Because till before that time, CI didn't exist. People used to not really test. How do I say? And why? Because obviously, and what was the thing that Circle CI and Travis CI and all of these people who were giving talks was advocating for was that once you have some sort of like a base setup of tests, which people used to hate the way they hate documentation, right? Then you suddenly realize ki you can't now live without a team which doesn't have the CI, which doesn't have, because then, the confidence that you're making some changes, and if there is a test suit,
Yeah.
then you're extremely confident and you're sending pull requests, next pull requests every day. Otherwise, you'll create a PR and you'll not have confidence. And me, if you send the PR to me, if I'm reviewing it, again, I'll not have confidence. I'll have to really look so like just I'm doing the job of whatever computers, etc. So bottom line is ki CI took a while, and continuous documentation was the kind of like my thesis that evolved not because I was trying it, but because of kind of like a discovery that I ended up doing that in Acko. And and the more I spoke with other, tech heads and stuff, we realized no one has that. So the litmus test, how, like if the documentation says something. I remember one very interesting about for me is some sort of board meeting was happening, and investors were present, and the board of directors are present, and obviously CEO and some of us are present, and there was some question, right? And the question was of the order of, so we were looking at some number, right? Some business number, and there was a debate happening, what does this number really mean? In
Mm-hmm.
insurance, things get very complicated, and how are you calculating it? Is it, pro rata? Is it whatever? Has it accounted for the growth? And like, so it was and usually this kind of discussion I've seen in other meetings goes on and on and on. But the CFO immediately kind of opened the Acko.pdf. So one realization was Acko.pdf was present, relatively up to date version of Acko.pdf was present at the CFO's desktop, right? So it was present on a desktop, right? Like the guy was sharing the
Mm-hmm.
screen. It was present on the guy double clicked on it, opened the other very most awesome thing happened that this guy knew keeps in some chapter 12.1 or something. So he said that, right? This report that you're looking at right now is actually documented somewhere, and it's in chapter 12.1 because that chapter 12 was the CFO related, all the reports or something. I don't remember which was exactly chapter 12 or which one it was, but it was around 2019 I'm talking about when this happened. And uh, and it was obviously there. And so how did we achieve this, right? How did we achieve the CFO can blindly trust it? And the discussion was over. No one was like the CEO didn't argue again because it was CEO versus CFO versus. So the
Mm-hmm.
discussion was over. It was a bottom line. What documentation says this, we can trust it, blindly trust it. No one was questioning in the room, okay, maybe the documentation is wrong because that can't happen in Acko. Why? That is a very big achievement. And because of the workflow that I kind of ended up creating, which was basically every time you're doing so we in Acko we had manual testing. So every time a PR or rather every time we are doing a release, right? So every time a PR is there, in that PR we included the documentation also because we had a monolith, all the source code and the entire documentation was part of a single repository.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my manual QA head, right, Vital, that if any PR, if the documentation what it says, so for that PR, you will rebuild the PDF file, echo.pdf for every PR, you can rebuild it. And then you'll verify what is said in that PDF versus what behavior you see in the UAT or wherever you have deployed this PR to manually test it, right? If the two are not exactly the same, you just reject the PR. You don't have any discussion or any such thing. You just reject the PR. PR has failed, right? And the end result was that if, for example, let's say, and we did include, like for example, by the end of it, it was a GB's long
Mm-hmm.
acco.pdf, and I mean GB is big, and it has like some 1500 or 1700 pages, and you would say not a lot, maybe 70-80% of those pages were just screenshots. So we had actually a very dynamically changing product where the UI was actually changing quite reasonably fast. And we had screenshot of all screens and all states on that particular single PDF file, and it was up to date. Right? It's almost saying while I'm saying it, it sounds like incredible kind of claim that and that was whatever, right? So that was kind of so the QA guy will simply look at the screenshot in the PDF and look at the website, and if they are not the same, so if you have changed, let's say a border radius somewhere, the guy will just see, oh, this you have to. So the product manager or the developer, because they are very invested in making sure that PR gets deployed, right? Because they are telling the CEO that, when CEO is asking, when is this PR going to go live? Product manager is like, okay, no, if the only blocker is, okay, this particular image is screenshot is not, so they will just take a new screenshot and upload it. It's a very trivial
Yeah.
process. And it guarantees that then it will forever be accurate because you are verifying the documentation on every single release, right? And every single PR more or less. It was a lot of manual work, obviously,
Right.
but that's the cost. And it was not actually, we only had like two, three, this called manual QA. It was actually pretty easy because you know what is changing, right? QA doesn't start and retest every single thing. They are informed in this PR what has changed. So they usually have a standard battle of suite of tests, and then they have the PR related functionality which is changed. So it was in practice not really. It sounds very onerous, but it was very trivial. So basically, when I started FifthTry, I realized that I can't sell a new documentation format. I have to sell a tool, right? And I knew I can only sell to developers, and so I created this thing, and which I totally firmly believe in. It's not like the YC pitch is no longer. What we are doing right now is, to me, a much bigger company. Like
Right.
so therefore we are doing it, and at some point we can just simply launch. In fact, we did that. We I think in 2023 we actually revived the whole product, right? So in 2020 we were working on this. If your documentation is not up to date, your PR will be blocked, right? So that was a key product. That integration that we created was our 2020 YC application and YC product.
Mm-hmm.
But then since started we focusing on fastn, so we kind of let that guy kind of die out. And then 2023, when we were happy with fastn, I asked my team to know, let's go back and what is called look at the CI, and we build that CI as a separate uh, thing that was kind of there, but we couldn't really work on it so significantly. We'll come back to it maybe now or maybe in future or maybe
Right.
it's gone. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea is that I built a documentation tool because I knew to. So I built fastn first. So in 2029, in fact, 20 in Acko also actually, we created a CMS. We called it Graft. I think Graft is also on crates, but there is no repo because it is actually part of Acko internal, and I couldn't
Right.
find what is called. So the source code. So we had the permission, obviously, to open source and release all of that. But so Graft was the CMS which had the basic. If you look at the dash dash something colon and key value, so the initial syntax were actually there in kind of Graft. So in 2017-18, I built on the Graft because I've been building multiple solutions in that line, right? Like fasting was like fourth, fifth iteration of whatever the language itself that I had in mind. And obviously, Graft is the one which was concrete. Before that, in Acko, sorry, in CoverFox, we created something called CF blog, which sounds like a blog, but is actually a CoverFox blog. But it was also another attempt at it. So in the CF blog, I created something in a CoverFox in around 2015-16. Then 17-18, I created Graft. And then around 19, I started for real. Obviously, the name fasting came much later. And
Mm-hmm.
initially, I thought of this as FifthTry. So to me, FifthTry was a general code word. Just I booked a domain, and it was my personal blog. It was my personal documentation tool. It was my personal Notion slash personal, what do you call it, the Obsidian or whatever. So I created. So I started that journey. In fact, actually in 2019, no, 2020. So 2019, it became my primary node tool, fast and FifthTry. When it was, there was no idea that it is going to become a company. It became my primary, and initially I was going to open source everything, in that, which eventually I ended up doing. Um, so in 2020, I built the first local syncing part. So, so FifthTry, you will write your documentation or write your notes in this FifthTry, which would be stored on the cloud, obviously, on fifthtry.com. But there was also an FT local, which would do the syncing part, right? And the syncing was fully conflict aware. So, for example, if the same document you modified on cloud and on local, and you try to sync it, and there is a conflict here, because I'm very passionate about the conflicts, right? The conflicts has to be properly whatever. And I built that tool, which actually led to us creating a whole version control system out of the techniques that we built for local syncing conflict-aware local thinking stuff, right? So anyway, so that's
Mm.
the journey there. Initially, it was a documentation tool which had a change request feature, which is almost like GitHub pull request feature,
Right.
but natively integrated in the tool. So you didn't have to have a separate, like a GitHub repo and then your documentation tool. It was like a single tool which had a change request feature. And I think in 2020 or 21, we had a video, a set of video by Nikita. You should check out. She created lots of interesting video where you can see our version control based change request feature,
Yeah,
etc.
I've seen that.
Uh, yeah, so that was our original product. But then I realized ki building that version control system, the change request system, then the whole FifthTry sign up and all of that stuff, serving the documentation, and then the whole language, because the language is also part of that same monolithic code base. It was being too much for me to manage code wise. So I
Mm.
then decided to take a pause and started. I think I did a FTD launch in what is called 2021 around October, November time. If you go to Hacker News, you'll see that in my this thing history. So I think October, November, we did an FTD launch. It was very lukewarm kind of people were because it was pretty ambitious. Like if you want to be like a data language and also a template language and also a content language and so on. It was kind of like a XML plus plus and also Markdown plus plus and also some sort of like a React plus plus, which sounds very incredulous. So it was like weird.
Mm.
It didn't go very, very great. And I was not even ready to at all. And even now, I'm not ready to yet promote fastn because, in my opinion, what language is there in my head is not yet there. Really, the fastn 0.5 is very close, but not yet there.
Okay, so
So
I have to ask. Uh, so the idea was to build a software product that you could possibly sell. So, but you did not take a conventional route where you pick your programming language, pick your tool, write your software using that, and go sell it. You decided to create your own framework. You hadn't named it initially, but we call it Fastn today. So you decided that the current, at that time, the existing web development frameworks, including backend and front-end JavaScript frameworks, were not fit for your task. Is that correct? And if yes, then why?
it is slightly more sophisticated, or more. The answer is slightly more complicated. So earlier, I was very sold on the Rust plus Elm
Yeah.
based approach, and fastn was just the language for the content. And so at some point, I realized that fastn is actually, from day one, actually, I knew fastn had to become very, so fastn 0.2 was not powerful enough to be a full stack programming language.
Mhm.
So 0.2 only allowed you to use the subset of Markdown or maybe a few extra stuff. So we had obviously dash dash MD dash dash H1 dash dash code dash dash image obviously dash dash, and we had a dash dash ktex, for example, so you can write ktex related formulas
Mhm.
and a few very specific to us kind of things. So initially 0.2, so it's like the idea that I had about fastn or FTD at that time or whatever this notion, the language that I had in mind was to be a full stack thing. I didn't think of it as a full stack. I thought of it as Flash or something, which is like which allows you to create not just PDF, static PDF, but a very dynamic thing. But the fastn or FTD at that time when it was called FTD 0.2 did not have the features to be a full stack. How do I say? So till 0.2, Realm was in the picture, and I had to use it because it was great because obviously I built it over like told you like 5 6 years. But it was not the one that I had in mind. Right? It was if I have to use Rust and not a fastn, probably I'll go back to Realm because Elm is still to me the first best language for building front end, and
Mhm.
Rust is obviously the best language for building back end. Right? Uh, so yeah, so I in zero, I think right after the Hacker News launch, we when we split fastn, then at that time we kind of gave up on Realm altogether. So obviously for a while there was a transition period when most of the new stuff was happening. So at that time, I created FPM. So along with FTD, then there was an FPM for a while, which was meant to be FTD package manager, but it was also the web server. Right. So initially, what is Fastn Route now, which is a web server and a package manager and all of those stuff, was an FPM package, and FTD was just the language part. So, but eventually I realized it's not helping me maintaining two different repos because you can't use FTD without FPM. So it was kind of useless as a standalone crate. And anyways, I was telling you have to use FTD, but you have to install FPM. So my language was pretty weird, and and I had two different ftd.dev and fpm.dev, so two different domains. And which documentation, what do you document on ftd.dev and what do you document on fpm.dev, right? How to start the server was documented supposedly on fpm.dev, but how to write a ftd file was documented on ftd.dev. So it was called like I felt like my hope and this thing. In fact, actually, at some point, we did create a ftd Python project also, which allowed you to use FTD from your Django code, for example. We actually had the whole demo of that.
Right. So FTD.
Oh, So, sorry. So, yeah, so initially my thought was that we will use FTD as a more of a templating language or something so that
Hmm.
it can be used in all sorts of places where you need templating language. But then I realized the package management was still essentially required by the Django also because how do you distribute and the awesomeness of FTD was only when you can what is called use the package ecosystem also. So if you so we ended up shipping a whole anyway. So we had FTD. The whole dream of keeping FTD and FPM as two different entities kind of didn't pan out. So we like fuck it, we'll merge the FTD them into a single one. And then someone came and suggested Fasten. I bought the domain. I loved the name, and yeah.
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to picture a framework is to compare it with existing framework. So would you say Fastend today is more similar to something like Ruby on Rails or Django, or is it more similar to React combined with a backend REST API that talks JSON? So a React SPA plus a JSON backend, or a Ruby on Rails that is rendering static templates, querying database and stuff like that.
So actually, so to me, when you I have to answer this question by to me, Fasten is more similar to Excel than either of the stuff that you said, right? So if you look at Excel, right? What is Excel? Excel is about obviously data and formulas and stuff, which you would
Yeah,
say,
right,
okay, you will compare it with backend. And yet, Excel has UI and you can create conditional formatting and so on, right? So Excel is also the front end. If you change something in one cell, all the other cells. So Excel is UI actually. Think about that, right? When you are
hmm,
looking at Excel generated report, you'll compare that with not Django, but with HTML, right? Like if
right,
you, but then when you look at the logic of Excel, you'll compare it with Django, right? So Excel is the right kind of thing that I have in mind where there is a so that's the interesting thing, right? Ki if you think about programming languages, they're actually to me like all of them are kind of like designed wrong in the sense that they are designed with stdio as sort of kind of like the primary like print, like the hello
hmm,
world of every programming language is
yeah,
a print statement which goes to stdio,
hmm,
and yet we don't interact with stdio other than when you're using terminal. We interact with UI.
yeah,
So what is so none of even JavaScript, which is supposed to be a UI related language, is much closer to Python in terms of
hmm,
what it does than closer to let's say Excel, right? Because JavaScript doesn't know about UI at all for that matter, right? There's just some API available to you, but that API could be made available to Python also, that rapid script, and there are a bunch of Python-based framework that has come up, which lets you kind of control the DOM, browser DOM, using just writing Python code, right? So that doesn't, so just because you have access to DOM doesn't make you a UI language.
yeah,
For me, a UI language, hello world, should show UI, right? So in fastn, for example, the hello world that you write is not, there's no console. There's no print. Like
Mm-hmm.
fastn is a programming language, it doesn't have a print statement. It's a nonsense kind of stuff. Because everything in fastn is a UI, right? So in fact, actually anything which is not referenced by the UI or needed by the UI, fastn compiler automatically just eliminates that. That compiler, you just delete
Yeah.
that. Imagine that, right? So we are a UI based language, more like Excel than the text based languages with some API support for doing UI. Like Django doesn't have UI, it just generates it knows how to generate strings, right? Or do some sort of object-oriented stuff, which helps you generate either HTML through the string formatting or generate HTML through a DOM-like API, right? But neither of those stuff, like for example, if you create a variable X in Python, that X is not has no connection with the UI,
Mm.
right? Like this is nonsensical. You may use X for generating the HTML, sure, but that's just a string, right? The fact that HTML is HTML in Django, there's no such thing as HTML. It's just a string, kind of more or less, right? Like, sure, you might have some HTML class and template related stuff, but ultimately, what you're dealing with is you're sending an HTML, which is a string, over HTTP response, and then the browser is the one which takes that string. So you can say browser is only one which is UI, right? Like the browser natively talks UI, right? So, but then even JavaScript, which is kind of like a scripting language on top of the native stuff, doesn't have a, how do I say, UI understanding, right? So you can fully run fastn on the server. Like you can't run fastn on the server side without generating a UI. Technically, obviously, we have some support for JSON, ft.json, which can render not to an UI but to a JSON object. Sure, you can do that, but it is a
Uh,
very late addition. Till that point, you
yeah.
couldn't generate JSON through fastn, right? People used to laugh either what kind of language it is, can't do a print, can't generate a JSON. But that's the idea that we have a mental model of the language is totally different compared to all the language, and that's where that's why it has to be, how do I say, full stack. You can't, like, you just can't split the front end and back end in fastn. It is just one and same thing. In fact, fastn is mostly can totally be used. As of now, we do not have our own rendering engine, so we rely on browser. But if, for example, when we write the rendering engine, which we hope to do someday, it will be your proper. It will be like a language like Swift for generating your UI
Mm.
or whatever. But even I can tender that Swift also is not a UI based
Yeah, it's a
language,
real
right?
programming
So
language.
exactly. So we are a different kind of language, is
Yeah.
what I can say.
Okay, so I think I should move to some questions that I have written before.
Mhm.
So one thing that is important and it is universally important everywhere in every company is money, right? So FifthTry has existed for about 5 years now. So have we made any money, and if not, then why?
Yes, I may be good techie, but I suck as a founder. No, not at all, not at all. Um, so let me tell you. So we did obviously get into IC right after I quit my previous company, Acko. So in fact, actually, it was very quick. About 2 months we were into YC.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously we raised more seed money from some investors, and we still have some of it. It was not a big seed round; it was a modest seed round. It's going to currently at just currently I can only support the two of us, more or
Yeah.
less at roughly we have less than 1 year runway at very like you might be getting market salary, but I'm definitely getting like peanuts to just somehow sustain. Uh, so now obviously, and we got the funding in 2021, right? So you can argue that 21, 22, 23 we were rich, or at least we had money to spend on basic stuff, right? Like few developers and
Hmm.
maybe hire a designer and so on. So we were kind of in a comfortable position, equivalent to having a job somewhere else. But post 23, I think 24 onwards, we started if you remember, we started cutting down the team out of the
Yeah.
basic necessity of not having money. to support as many people, and we are down to just the two of us.
Right.
And yeah, so that's our situation. And now, um, so the thing is, key one building a programming language is just hard. It's like uh, it's harder than when you know it is hard. Like
Mm.
even when you know it is hard, it is harder than how you hard you think it is. Uh, as you see, 0.4 is pretty decent language. Uh, Pretty crappy implementation, like in terms of performance at the very least, and in terms of a lot of tech debt, infinite amount of tech debt. So much so that probably I think 0.5 is going to be a rewrite.
Yeah.
And we did focus. So I think till 23 we did not worry about money, and 24 is when we started worrying. So in January 24 is I remember having a kind of like a conversation with my team. Okay, now let's worry about where the
Yeah.
credit card and like where people are going to. We should have a private. So in so let me tell you the history again. So in 2020 we had a product. In fact, when
Yes.
2020 July, we had a product. At least I could use it, and you could use it as a personal documentation tool, which was integrated with GitHub and some of the and so on. So around 2021, we stopped having a product, right? We kind of stopped working on FifthTry and moved to fastn and FTDS, open source GitHub repo. So in 2021, we intentionally, at this point, we also had a whole conversation with all our investors talking about what we are going to do. And I'm very lucky to have such investors who kind of allowed us to do that, to kind of go from a whatever fully SaaS like model to a fully open source first
Yeah.
model, right? And my this thing was well, at a very gross level, I wanted to save FTD slash fastn from FifthTry, right? I didn't want okay, it's a funded company, open source product, and then somehow it gets some adoption, and then a rug pull kind of happens, and you start capitalizing. So I wanted to like make sure somehow on day one, and I told the investors also, okay, this is like so for actually if you remember, if for a very long time our license was just the BSD.
Mm. Yeah.
At some point, I think there was enough pressure on me to worry about things, so we actually switched to AGPL, and we could do that because there were no outside contributors, largely because I never promoted fastn anywhere, so nobody knew it. So every
Right.
work that we were doing were all paid work, so I could change the license to AGPL. And 2024 is so 2024 is when 2023 we started having some sort of success also, by the way, in terms of going to colleges. And if you look at our Discord, we have currently have some 3,000 or so
Mm.
people on our Discord, and for a new programming language, 3,000 people on the programming language Discord is actually pretty big achievement. We did it through giving free T-shirts, obviously,
Yeah.
so it was not necessarily like fully organic, but it was also like with just I mean, we didn't have infinite amount of Google like money, right? We had a very little money. I think not even like $2 per Discord user. We actually ended up spending right 2 or 3 developers at the end. Like at the end when we stopped around, I think it was some $3 per new Discord user is what was like if I just cumulatively add all the marketing related expenses I'm doing and divide it by the number of Discord guys who joined our forum in a month, that was roughly the math. So what we saw was that the language started getting sort of like acceptance because when we used to so we went to colleges and we saw that when we are teaching something to college students and they used to kind of get it right like the fastn being an easy language which was our primary positioning was actually kind of proven. The problem was that in order for you to code with fastn you had to install fastn on your machine,
Mm.
and we didn't even have signed binaries. So in case of Windows, if you're trying to install fastn, it used to show some really ugly
Yeah.
error, and you had to do some right click and do I don't even know what some stuff depending on which version of Windows you're using. Mac also used to show this warning. So it was a pretty annoying experience. In fact, most of the time you used to go in just installing fastn on your machine. And similarly, after installing fastn, if you want to publish or share your site with some people, you have to create a GitHub account. And to my surprise, a lot of developers do not have GitHub accounts. So we had to end up. So I think we tracked around 500 GitHub accounts we ended up creating. And at some fundamental level, FifthTry and GitHub are competing. So it was not very great of me to spend
Yeah.
money to give GitHub new accounts. Vercel, similarly, we ended up creating a lot of Vercel accounts because we didn't have any. So 2024 was about us to, okay, fine, we have a language, kind of gets decent, how do I say, acceptance by developers, not love. Um, let's build some SaaS, right? So and we the goal I was not making money. It was just to make that experience much better than it
Hmm.
was in those sessions that we took. So we built an online ID, we built an online everything, right?
Yeah.
And at that point we kind of had a great ended up adding support for Wasm, SQLite. We had a great ish, how do I say, at least from my point of view, platform. But we had a problem which is performance. It's fast and when we were building our, we were in a hurry of doing all the stuff. We basically just ignored performance. You know, how do I say, startup way and language is again very hard and you cannot just do everything in one and especially if you have only two developers also at any time, right? So the performance that I thought would be a good problem to have, for a lot of startups was actually a very hard problem. And for us, performance was extremely hard because it depended on the user generated code, right? So we are actually running user provided code. And if that user provided code itself can have performance issues, like you can totally write code which is completely non-performing. So, or it can trigger something, even if your code is not particularly bad, it can trigger some things in our compiler which is not optimized, which is pretty.
Yeah.
So we just kept on having issues after issues. And we tried to figure out some distributed solution, which kind of became harder for us because we standardize on SQLite, which I strongly believe is the right solution. But for you to do SQLite right, you should use something more complicated than we have. So, and that's where we started this mini journey of zero point 0.5, which was performance optimized. So we thought
Yeah.
we will rewrite fast and create zero point 0.5. We'll also rewrite our hosting infrastructure, zero point 0.5 version of it. We were going to use Foundation DB as basic stuff, and we had great design, but it was just not like we were not able to make it happen in the sense in especially in the, how do I say, and we were like, okay, we did launch, like for example, one of the fastn built-in fastn deployed on FifthTry site, went to Hacker News front page, got a reasonable traction. Obviously, it was stayed on the front page for a while, um, we did get a lot of traffic. But that week after that, we had multiple outages, and kind of they were all related to bot kind of like
Hmm.
obviously they were all triggered by our faults, but
Right.
that got amplified when we had a lot of bot traffic, right? And we used to kind of, and our solution was restart infrastructure, which is very sad because we realized very weird situations. Like for example, we just can't SSH to the machine only to investigate what is happening because I mean Rust is fast, Rust is so good that when Rust programs misbehave, they will take up all your CPU in such a like a tight loop way that your machine will just like Django and Python and Node, etc. Node is just a single threaded, so you just can't starve your entire unless you're running four, and even then you can't because if one of them is bad, not all four of them would be bad. But in case of
Hmm.
Rust, you can easily achieve a situation that you have just completely.
Yeah.
So, anyways, so
So,
and that was also when we. Hmm.
to give a little context, the FifthTry hosting that we launched today, it has about 600 websites hosted by FifthTry, our single server, right? So arguably, you could have gone ahead and launched a pricing page, started charging and doing some marketing, and it could have brought some money. So yeah, please go on. That also.
Yeah, see, you see that kind of strategy. Well, you could do that,
Mm.
but you see, so one as a founder, the biggest problem is key. Once you start some money generating activity, right? Uh, it is hard. How do I say to stop after that. Once you have a graph which is going up, first of all, because you'll obviously be proud of it, you'll share
Mm.
it with investors, and maybe the first $5 per month would be a great MRR, right? Maybe. And then that will go to from 5 to 10 MRR and so on, right? So that would be brilliant. And but at some point, the Fagaviski, I couldn't with straight face and like stand behind the service because because things were going down all the time. So
Yeah,
if someone said, I want to build a website, can I, as a founder, like with how do I say, staying true to myself, recommend fastn and specifically FifthTry hosting? The answer was no. I knew the faults, and these faults are not theoretical. We are not being just conservative here. Your site, because you saw what happened to
yeah,
today
right.
has been, right? Like it went down so many times, and it kind of eroded the confidence of that founder in our technology. And so basically, if someone pays, and then we have so many downtimes, so unless we are sure, really sure, it will be like we will just be educating people to not trust us. They will trust us because our reputation. I can just say, oh, see, I'm so and so. I've got such listing. I've got YC and these other investors and so on. So I will definitely get. Let's say, for example, all the YC guys might have trusted me, or at least I tried me out. And initially, it would have worked, right? Like that's the fuck up. It will work fine while you are doing development and testing, but then when you go live, suddenly the site would be down, and and there's no quick fix. Like we just couldn't quick fix. Obviously, we could run multiple instances and this kind of
Yeah.
solution, but the specific site would still be affected, right?
Mm.
So and it'll be our fault because they are not doing anything wrong, and you can't just quickly fix compiler, right? Like that's the fuck up key. I could quickly fix, let's say, if there's one SQL query which is not performing well, if there's some API which is not doing well, sure, you can go and look at the code for that. It's usually a very finite surface area if you're looking at an API. But when you're looking at a compiler, and which every single page was a call to just serve, right? In Fasting, we have a serve which internally does like Fasting document passing and compilation stuff. So it couldn't be localized to a single thing, and yeah. So obviously, we had some amount of debt. We could have done it, but again, no point talking about all of that.
Yeah,
The reality is that I myself, as a founder, told my developer, "We don't worry about these things for now because you can't do everything. It's just bottom line key. Just building a
yeah,
language that someone, even one person will find valuable, and or rather one productive real application will be written itself is a huge task. And doing it in such a way that even Rust today has such a, how do I say, horrible compiler performance.
yeah.
And you can't, if somebody tells you, oh, you have $1 billion, can you improve the compiler? You'll probably not be able to do that. It's not,
Mm.
how do I say, an easy problem to improve the compiler performances. So, so yeah, creating a
Yeah,
delightful language and a fast compiler. I mean, Elm guys did it somehow, So, but they took a lot of how do I say, compromise. Their pure language made it lot easier. Our language is not
yeah.
pure, and again, maybe they are much better than us, right? So maybe it is totally possible. We couldn't do it because we may not be as great developers.
Yeah, so I think the problem that we faced while launching FifthTry hosting somehow triggered something inside us that made us stray far away from a centralized hosting to a place that you call P2P, right? So currently, what we are thinking of is P2P apps where there is no concept of centralized server, right? So in order to solve the problem of server performance, we just nuke the server itself. So that brings me uh, to the current time, right? So what are we thinking now? So the now we have different sets of problems. The first one is that we now are at a place where we need money, right? So
So, I mean, sure. I mean, how do I say? To me, that's not how I think about the whole P2P thing. First of
no,
all, right? Like,
I was trying to transition to a better. So I was
yeah,
trying to find a way to, but
yeah, yeah.
the
So,
question has become that what do we do now? It's kind of
yeah,
where I was trying to.
yeah. So I'll tell you. So when I was, like I told you, the first version of Fastn had local syncing, right? Or rather, FifthTry. when even FTD was not a term, right? So FTD also came up after FifthTry was created. FTD was simply FifthTry document,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was a creative naming process I went to decide the name of my language, FTD, FifthTry document. Earlier it was just called document. In my code base, it was just called document.
Uh-huh. Oh, maybe I think I know. Let me just. So I think you're back. Yeah. P R.
Hey man,
Yeah. Mhm.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're back.
So, yeah, so what exactly is the question? What are we answering right now?
Sorry.
Okay,
The
how do we
question was
transition
that
to the new models?
no. How do the question is that what do we do today that brings us money, and what are we thinking that we should work on? How
Yeah,
should Fasten evolve and all that stuff?
yeah. See, so what I'm trying to say is ki two things has been really dear to me in like when I was building the programming language Faston, or I was thinking of Faston was always a programming language to me. The name was not there, or
Um.
rather, I knew ki in 2010 ki LaTeX is not good because you can't, let's say, build a game, or you cannot build an interactive visualization. You cannot build something which remembers what you have done yesterday, and then today you can just go proceed from there, etc. So to me, it was always a fully fledged, fully programming language where authors, and it was supposed to be designed for non-programmers because it was designed for authors.
Mhm.
So, and I believe Excel is again, and to me, Excel has been there since almost the very beginning because Excel has shown that it is actually possible for non-programmers to write significant amount of interesting stuff. Obviously, I don't believe you'll be writing a lot of code. In the sense, you'll be probably using ready-made packages and plumbing things together, mostly as an end author kind of person, not necessarily writing everything from scratch. But so I wanted to democratize programming, right? So that's the thing. I wanted everyone to be able to code. So this
Uh,
everyone should be able to code has been there in me since I have been teaching programming like all my Django, Go, Rust, Elm, all of these four. I have taken extensive amount of sessions teaching these to various meetups, various whatever. In every like I've always used, let's say Rust and Elm, for example, when I use Acko. I mean, no one in the industry knew Rust and Elm in 2017-18, right? So who taught them? I taught them because they were not even really. So I've been always teaching programming. I was always like even a non-techie people, I'll be teaching them Python, for example, so that they can be. So so for me, this is like a great, how do I say, enabler. And so while you can solve programming, so there's two aspects of it. One is the programming aspect, the other is the hosting aspect, right? So even if you can make programming easier, you're still stuck with okay, AWS and so on, right? I strongly don't believe in AWS kind of model. I believe that this laptop that you have is extremely powerful. The phone that you have is
yeah.
extremely powerful. The current phone that I have has more CPU and RAM than the first desktop that I had. Right in IIT, I studied. I learned all programming on one desktop computer machine, and that had less CPU RAM than the phone that I'm using. So and there I could do so much. And here on the phone, I'm like it's the most crippled product ever. It's like so I just hate this wastefulness and this you need to have this you want to learn programming, why don't you have just a server? Like you see the server requires a credit card.
Yeah.
How many people in India or the world have credit card, right? That alone is extremely tiny number. So you're just extremely, how do I say? So I feel like I've always been, and in 2015, for example, when I was working for 14 actually, or maybe even 13. Somewhere, so in 13, I started working for what is called BrowserStack. And in 13, we built screen sharing, or rather, Nakul, etc., had already built screen sharing, and I joined them and I improved the screen sharing portion of the product. And in 2014 or 13 or 15, somewhere we started using WebRTC. So I got into WebRTC, how do I say? And then how do I say? I was like really blown away because WebRTC is peer-to-peer,
Mhm.
and the whole client server model was totally broken because we built tools which were like peer-to-peer, where like one both browsers are just the full application is between the two browsers. There's no
Yeah.
server. The server is only doing that minimal bootstrapping job of serving the static HTML, CSS, JavaScript files so that something is there. Domain is obviously server, but the actual thing was just peer to peer. Right? You just write some JavaScript code, and the two machines can talk to each other, and you can build so much. Right. So for me, the question was, what the hell is that .com doing, right? It's just becoming sort of like I mean, you can package that whole thing as a, how do I say, a standalone application, and you don't need a server at all then. Obviously, you need to solve some initial handshakes, whatever the turn and turn, blah,
Yeah.
blah, whatever the stuff is needed. And so anyway, so I actually in 2015 built a peer-to-peer file sharing tool called Burstic. Didn't open source it. It was open source, but I never promoted it. And now I think it was on GitLab or Atlassian Bitbucket, and I don't know. I don't even have a login to that account right now. But it was using Go, had a decent WebRTC support. So I built that a complicated and a lot of idea that you see in Kulfi today, like the ID 52. There was a ID that every peer had. In fact, there I created a unique ID per peer ratio, pair. So, for
Uh,
example, the ID that I shared with you, I will never share with anyone else.
right.
So I think that went a bit too far because manageability was really, really hard. And obviously, the tool was not used by anyone beyond the limited testing till I asked you to install it and so on. And that was actually the time when I realized we have reached the upper limit of what you can do with Go. Go, as great as could be to get started, is not great when you have a relatively more complex program. The type system is not great, and the thread safety that we needed, like the program used to just constantly deadlock. And I had lots of stuff. It was all my fault, but again, Go was supposed to protect me and Rust. That is when I started in serious, started looking at Rust. And then whatever. So I've been always this thing ki you cannot solve programming and make it accessible unless you solve the IP problem, like the inter IP address problem. Like there are very few IP addresses, they are all credit card gated. You cannot get an IP address without spending money, which
Mhm.
means you exclude so much of people. And so, and I wanted to be people to be able to use their phone as much as possible. And the tiny Raspberry Pi today, for example, has more CPU and RAM than my desktop, right?
Right.
So my CPU literally had a 700 megahertz, and I think it didn't even have GBs of RAM. It was less than a GB of RAM. It was like 512 or 256 MB of RAM. I think it was. I don't remember actually how much RAM, but it was definitely not in GBs.
Yeah, my
And
first computer had 256 megabytes of RAM.
Yeah, exactly. So I must have some. I don't remember exactly how many megabytes, but I don't think it was GBs. I think my hard disk itself is not in GBs. Like GB was a number, like it used to be like a thing. Like today, what we as TV, I think was GB in
Hmm.
1998. So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is ki Raspberry Pi is totally possible. Why can't you code there and so forth? So if you remember, there was this one laptop was child project or something like that. Like there was some Bill Gates ka project or some people created like these laptops which are very very cheap
Are
and
you
they
talking
wanted to give
about
it to all.
Chromebooks?
No, before that.
Oh,
Uh,
I don't know.
so anyway, so I've been always
Uh,
of that this thing ki every human being should have a good computer device, and you need obviously you have to solve for electricity and network. You can't not have these three things. But once you have these three things, you should then be not dependent on data centers and definitely not dependent on SaaS. So, so when I saw all those performance issues, I realized, ki, okay, maybe I can solve it, or I can just not solve it and say for a single user, fastn is still good enough. And fastn happens to be kind of probably the very few languages which can work on your phone, because again, Rust and so on. So the only question remaining was the networking, and I always knew peer-to-peer networking was my this thing. Rust did not have a good peer-to-peer. Like I saw the lib P2P, I never liked it.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't give me that. And then an Arrow came along, and I was like, this all solve all of our problem. So yeah, so that's where we are. We are adding some more features to Fasten, which is basically when you start Fasten, it doesn't just listen on a TCP IP whatever port, IP port combination. It also listens on the Kulfi thing, whatever the peer-to-peer thing, which basically means ki now I don't have to deploy it anywhere. Any device anywhere can run a fastn, and anyone else can access it while it is running. Obviously, this architecture still leaves out a tiny bit, which is if you're really relying on something essential which is shared across more than one devices, you need some more stable entities,
Yeah.
and that stable entities should have good internet, good Wi-Fi or internet, sorry, battery or power, and they should not, how do I say, need so many OS updates. It just should be a good. It can be your Raspberry Pi, it can be your Linode or any of the cloud or data center stuff, or it can be something provided by Fastn, right? We can just give you hosting, and we will give you basic stuff like, for example, so I strongly believe that you should own data, right? Like if you are programming, think about that. If human beings in general at large, the way they are cooking, so you and me don't think in terms of, oh, all food will come from restaurant or from
Mm-hmm.
Google like company, right? We cook at our home and so on. So if we are doing that, uh, we are still left with the final issue of how do we take backup of that stuff, uh, and that should be offsite, and how do we so I'm like saying, instead of thinking of us as website hosting, we are running Fasten for you, right? So, but instead of calling it website hosting, if we say we're running your Fasten peer-to-peer instance, because Fasten was meant to be peer-to-peer from
Yeah.
whenever we were able to do that. Um, so now we are going to give you a paid, how do I say, SaaS offering where you can run your primary instance on our infrastructure if you choose to. Everything else doesn't matter where you run it, but if you choose to run with us, we will give you, and obviously we'll charge you for backups and stuff, right? The bandwidths and yeah. So that's kind of how we are trying to slightly retransition or reposition ourselves from a Vercel-like website hosting provider to a more of a P2P, how do I say, beacon host, or I don't know what do we call it, like just this is your stable P2P host. It is going to receive a lot less traffic now because in earlier, because you were mapping your .com and it was meant for companies like Stack and Acko.
Yeah.
Yeah, your video is gone.
Oh, I can still hear you and see you just fine. Yeah, can you not hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Uh,
So I'm saying ki if we position ourselves not as a website hosting, like today has been was a website hosting solution which got traffic from hundreds of thousands of people when the site went down. If we position ourselves as we run fast and for you, just you, right? Because or maybe for your company, but meant to be used only by people inside your company, and only even they will only use it only for the singing part. So whenever a document changes or something, etc., then they will be, communicating with us. So it's a lot less, how do I say, load for us, and we can then solve or rather not worry about our performance issues, and end up creating something even better than what we had earlier. As a So our vision then obviously is people can stop using SaaS products and they can write the software that they want and run it on their phone and or whatever infra that we are providing for them, or Raspberry Pi or whatever.
hmm. By the way, we are beyond our 1 hour limit, so if you have something that you can, because
No,
I'm
so
out.
I do have time if we can
Oh, okay.
continue. Otherwise, we should do try to wrap up now though.
Yeah,
We should
so
look at
I
last
do
two
want to
questions.
wrap up, but I do want to ask one last question. That so
Mhm.
if I have to phrase our current situation, can I say that uh, we are taking torrent, so with torrent, and so with torrent people, what you would do is you would only share your files. So I have a file, I can seed my files, the number of seeders and the number of peers they all allow. So that's how torrenting works. So would it be correct to say that we are building an ecosystem on top of a torrenting like base layer where you don't talk in terms of files, but in terms of UI, in terms of information. So I want to share my blog, I can share my blog. If I want to share my some portion of my hard disk, so we are literally talking bytes here. So as low level as that and as high level as an HTML document, everything goes on P2P. So would you say that this is a successor to classic BitTorrent and an ecosystem on top of that? Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say it is slightly the way you phrased it, it sounds a little bit more complex than the way I think of it is. We are simply putting HTTP over BitTorrent, let's say, or peer-to-peer.
Yeah, okay.
So, like with HTTP, you can do everything like file sharing or chat or like we already have solved what can you do with HTTP, virtually every single thing, right? From Google Docs to WhatsApp to everything is
Hmm,
can be done over HTTP. So just that HTTP requires IP address, domain names, blah blah. So if we make HTTP, non-IP dependent, so that it's peer-to-peer, etc. So we're doing actually very simple stuff, right? Like
right.
ultimately we had a web server, we have IRO, and we just built an HTTP over IRO kind of proxying thing. So you can argue that's all we are. Like we are so much talk for just this tiny
Hmm.
bit of real innovation.
Shit, I lost you again. Uh, I should just wait.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
So I'm thinking beyond HTTP over IRO or HTTP over peer-to-peer, we are trying to create sort of like a rich ecosystem of because now in this world you cannot just use any Python and Django and Ruby and Rust code because if you do that, then again, how the problem would be, let's say if it is peer-to-peer, both peers have to have the same software installed.
Right.
Because in the client server model, you can just install whatever you need dependencies on the server and everything is fine. Client need not have anything. But in the peer-to-peer model, so while obviously when I'm talking to you and I can choose to connect to your fastn which is running on your how do I say machine, but then that makes me dependent on you all the time,
Hmm.
right? So you have to be online all the time, right? At the very least. So in peer-to-peer, you don't have this level of, how do I say, each peer is online all the time. Peers come and go, right?
Yeah.
Whereas server, we have a whole DevOps team and etc. making sure the server remains up. In the peer-to-peer, you don't have that luxury. So we are creating some sort of like a syncing solution, data syncing offline first. Like so you still have HTTP, but the HTTP is not your primary way of accessing. HTTP is only for syncing and or primarily for syncing. So if both of us have the same software or compatible software, we can sync on some database, right? So some data that is so you will have your version of the data, I'll have my own version of the data, and our mutual fasting servers will somehow know how to talk to each other and sync the underlying data. And obviously, this will not be true for all sorts of applications. So, for example, if you're building something like Google Docs or Figma or any sort of shared note-taking tool or shared to-do or stuff, syncing works great. But if you are really building a blog, for example, it doesn't make sense for me to copy all your blog. Let's say you're creating your own YouTube equivalent. Let's say you have a bunch of videos you want to share with the world. It doesn't make sense for me to download the videos of every single one in the world, right?
Hmm.
That would just not work. So obviously, and when you're sharing YouTube or a blog, you're not sharing with me. Like when you're sharing a document, you're sharing with me. Documents typically have a smaller share radius, but if you have a public kind of stuff, I can access. So we have two modalities. By how will I fastn connect with your fastn? Either for syncing, which would be for any application which can be done through syncing kind of interface, or it can be for live access when I want to see your blog or video, etc. Even for video, we can do some sort of more advanced. So currently, we are thinking of building some auto merge based syncing, but tomorrow we might even build some sort of uh, a general purpose file syncing also, so that
Mm-hmm.
your images, because so we also are going to add object store kind of stuff
Oh
where
yeah,
you
we are
can store
talking
all your
about.
files, all your videos, etc. Also in this, and you can't put images in your auto merge document or inside SQLite. So we have SQLite, we have auto merge, and we have some sort of object store. And obviously we need a different syncing strategy for each of them, and we have to do some on-demand syncing, etc., etc. So it's going to be a pretty complicated stuff. But the core part is that we are going to offer you one stable host,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously you can use your own stable host if that is how you like. So we are basically, in short, HTTP over. So most other peer-to-peer programs, like, so for example, you have BitTorrent, but Bitcoin is another very, very popular, how do I say, peer-to-peer. So normally, or WhatsApp, for example, is very common, or this video thing that we are doing is all peer-to-peer. So, but usually when these, so WebRTC is the only one which is like a generic peer-to-peer tool,
Hmm.
which is agnostic of application and just a layer, right? So there's no other WebRTC abstraction. There's no Ruby on Rails of WebRTC.
Yeah,
So you can think of fastn as a Ruby on Rails for WebRTC. So so something like that if you think.
right. I think I'm out of questions, and we should wrap this up. One thing that I really like that you said is that today we have a Raspberry Pi, which is cheap hardware, which is very powerful. If we solve networking and we make it cheap, almost free enough, then we have basically a tool in our hand that we can go to villages and teach kids how to program, how to use computer, which is very fascinating for me.
And in
Yeah,
terms of FifthTry roadmap, I do want to even
yeah, we
sell
had
the product
right.
hardware itself. Like, I mean, we are not doing SaaS, we can do hardware, for all you know.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think we should discuss the consulting and the sustainability part
Oh
maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So yeah. Okay.
yeah, so one way to make money that we have discussed so far is the Fastn Cloud, which is a P2P instance that we rent on behalf of you, right? The other is that you just said is we can sell hardware in future for whatever purpose, right? For education or for something. And the third is that since we write our software in Rust, and we can say that we have some a decent amount of programming experience, uh, so that brings us why not help
Mhm.
other companies write
Right.
their source code in Rust. Yeah.
So the central topic that we're discussing is how. Uh, to me, we are a mission-oriented company, and so far we were VC funded, which is kind of at odds with each other. So thankfully, we are no longer VC darlings. VCs are looking for AI, and it's like right now I can't get investment in FifthTry.
Yeah.
It should have been a bad news, but I'm saying that with such a good smile on my face because it's like I know that that path is out, so I have to focus on other paths. How do we make also sustainable? And obviously the SaaS, I'm giving something out which is a paid service, and but given the fact that we have less than a year of runway left, the SaaS route obviously will take us time, and we don't know. And again, I'm saying so far I had like a luxury of figuring out what is the right thing to do, and I'm not like want to be dependent on, oh, just this is making money. Maybe we can launch it and we can run it, but so far I was able to 100% focus on exactly what is good
Hmm.
for fastn and FifthTry and so far. When you start worrying about this mundane stuff like how to make money, you might start compromising on what is the right thing to do for,
Yeah.
including for humanity. I feel like so far I've optimized and tried to optimize on that part. How do we do maximum good for maximum number of people? And if you start thinking of money too much, that's probably why we are not very, very busy, whatever, friendly right now. But bottom line is, um, in terms of sustainability, other than VC and SaaS. We have a few other options, and we tried one, which is because we are a programming language, and right now, if you do like fastn because of the promises that we have made, um, um, uh, you can choose to hire us, and that's we tried to create a FifthTry studio at the beginning of this year, and we
Yeah.
kind of yeah.
Hmm.
So, but we couldn't because I don't have that. Neither I am good at sales of going to clients and get projects. Neither I'm very great at project delivery where your client is asking every day requirements are not clear and software has to be delivered on a certain date. And these are a little bit stressful for me. And also it requires us to build a largish team and then manage them. And then so the day-to-day management will become like too much for me, which will take away from my focus on Fastn and all the cool stuff that we're trying to do.
Hmm.
It is sure it can bring us money, and we are trying to do an alternate of that in which we are getting Tatpar slash DP slash D to do that, and we will see how it goes. Um, we did when we started the whole peer-to-peer thing, our mission became much larger, right? So that is when we started thinking, okay, let's go. And in fact, actually, we applied to that some European funding.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know what's the story. They said they'll take 3 4 months to come to get back to us. So let's see what happens. But bottom line is we want to start taking sponsorship now, right? Like that's one way we can potentially get some money. And we have things like, for example, in the Malay, we have this bridge that we are running. So we can go to some, how do I say, DigitalOcean or some company like BrowserStack, for example, and try to convince them. In case of BrowserStack, we build BrowserStack Local, which is kind of Malay, and our Malay is slightly better than BrowserStack Local for some reasons. Obviously, BrowserStack Local has some advantages, but they can choose to integrate with Malay and then choose to, or Malay users can see that powered by BrowserStack sign here and there, which can hopefully get some funding from them, which might be good enough for me to have one, because we only need to have enough money for your and my salary right now, maybe if one more developer or something like that, right? Um, so that's the funding choice. So after the VC and SaaS and FifthTry Studio, the fourth option is we do sponsorship slash fundings. We go to different government grants. There might be lots of grants, which might be for promoting computer programming education, for promoting resilience, cryptography, peer-to-peer, independence, all of those stuff that are in line with our what we are doing. So we can go to them, and that's we definitely want to do that. So that's the key thing that we are starting. That we want to now go in front of more people and say, hey guys, we are doing trying to do some cool stuff, which is largely and we don't have money, so please help us out, types. So that's the open source, sorry, funding model. And finally, we are looking at this opportunity or possible thing that is related to what is called consulting, right? So basically, I've been using Rust in production in 2017. You are a pretty decent Rust guy, and we can look at some like companies who have early Rust teams, right? Like for example, so if you do not have, if you want to use Rust or you are using Rust, but you do not have Rust, how do I say, experts, access to experts, maybe you can hire us for some whatever basis, and then we can help you out and generate some sort of. We cannot. I don't want to. So I want to do it in such a way that I'm not doing coding for you. I don't want to do that. But I can sit with your developers and maybe help them write better as code or organize their program better, and be it logging, be it tracing, etc., be it error handling, be it how do you do a complicated monolith versus like so there's some we're not experts, we're not vertically great, but I think I mean as a head of whatever various companies, I have some little bit to offer maybe that can be valuable to some
Hmm.
companies. And so we are going to think about so that's to me the last part is very interesting in the sense that it has a very nice property, which is that all sales are inbound, if at all, if there is any sales. So because we are very bad at sales, and that is very applicable to a lot of open source projects, right? So if you are doing open source projects, you probably have this option because if you have a lot of stars, you may not have dollars because stars don't translate to dollars, but they do translate to some sort of authority. So
Yeah,
you build some sort of name for yourself, right? You are no longer, you know, a person who doesn't have a 500 star repo or whatever. We got multiple one of them, right? So obviously it has some sort of, and if you look at the promotion that we are doing or anyone open source does it, they are doing, let's say if you're doing build something in Go, you probably are going to promote your Go open source project in a Go related community. And in Go related community, what is there is that there are a lot of people who are using Go who belong to that category, which is they work for some company, they want to use Go, and they do not probably have a Go expert. And if you have built a Go open source project, you have proved that you may know a thing or two about Go. You may take some small uh, uh, consulting assignments of the nature of helping people use Go properly, just reviewing and auditing their Go code and so forth. So this to me is an interesting experiment. I want to see how it goes. So yeah, if you are considering using Rust or maybe Fastn, um, I don't know Fastn audience would be there, but at least
yeah,
Rust audience exists. So yeah, so that's the idea. So now we are going to kind of, so far we were not open for business. Now we are just open for business. So if you go to Malay site or if you go to Gulfi site and or Fastn site or FifthTry, etc. Now you'll see hopefully soon some sort of you can hire us um, like call out and we are not great at selling obviously you can see
yeah,
but yeah, that would be there. Hopefully, you will some people will click and some whatever. We'll see how it goes. You know, we don't have much money ambition. We just want to make sure that two developers are funded somehow so that we can just stop thinking about funding and keep on building
yeah,
cool stuff. That's the main. How do I say? Cool and obviously good for humanity kind of stuff. Sounds very
mm,
ambitious, but yeah. I mean, I think Malay is good and Fastn is good. It's like it's not just me saying that. I think they are interesting stuff. Peer to peer, a programming language for everyone. Yeah, why not? Should exist. If not us, someone else should do it, but it should exist.
yeah. I think that was a good moment to end this conversation. So yeah,
Hire us, donate to us.
oh yeah, just to if this goes on YouTube, I will put it in the description that. But I will have to first create that web page. But yeah, you can check a link in YouTube description sometime in future, and you will have a link that you can use to hire us. So yeah, it almost feels like we are selling our soul, providing us service so that we can keep working on the stuff that we like.
This is how bad we are at selling. Like the most honest thing you can do, you feel like, oh my God, I'm selling my soul to work. Sorry, I used that
Yeah,
word.
that's like nobody will. Yeah, I did not make
That's
us look like that we are excited about selling our services, but we are. We need to. Yeah, ठीक है, I'll stop.